Disclaimer. These interviews were recorded in Metro Manila between December 2021 and January 2022 during the COVID-19 pandemic. For safety reasons, we met with the interviewees of this audio documentary over Zoom, then altered their voices to protect their identities. So please bear this in mind when you listen to this series. Their names have also been changed to pseudonyms of their own choosing.
This is Downloading Interrupted, Episode 3. How come I don't have access to it?
I think it's not so much them versus us. It's the part of piracy. Sabi natin the pirates are part of the industry. They're just the first ones to evolve. Diba? Parang they're also filmmakers. They're also distributors. But they were the first ones who evolved out of necessity. Na parang, oh, kinuha ko yung pelikula mo, binurn ko sa DVD, binenta ko sa kanya. Happy naman siya. Happy ako. Ikaw lang hindi happy. 2 out of 3 yun, ha? So that's a step in the right, di ba? Now you figure out how to make yourself happy with our equation because both of us are happy. Same with Netflix. Netflix, happy ka? Happy ako. Happy kami. Filmmaker says, sorry, hindi ako nag-theatrical release so hindi ko nabawi yung $150 million budget ko. Problema mo yun. Ba't ka nag-shoot for $150 million? Diba? Shoot for less, entertain us both, and then we're all happy. So that's evolutionary in nature. I'm not saying that it will be for the good of cinema. Baka we end up 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now with all shitty films, which is happening right now on Netflix. Kaya ang hirap mamili sa Netflix. Ang papangit ng pelikula. But that's evolution. We end up with a lot of free films, pero they're all crappy, which is not necessarily bad kasi may isa or dalawa na super special film that are really going to make money or change the world forever. But mag-survive lang yun because all the other shitty films also kept shooting. So, yun, I would dare say it's part of... Pirates are also filmmakers. Sorry. Piracy is nothing but a new way of distributing. Di ba? Kahit anong gawin mo, if you evolve, there's a certain part of you that will die. Tama? Di ba? How can you evolve without a certain part of you changing or being shed? Tatanggalin mo. Kasi mag-evolve ka eh. You can't just expand and expand. You have to evolve.
Noah here. You might remember film producer Control for his strong opinions on film piracy.
Para sa akin, medyo bullshit yun kasi parang, what's the difference?
Aside from some of their previous opinions, Control also has a unique perspective on how film piracy evolved into what it is today. He says,
I think hindi ko na siya mag-detach from my own persona. I think sinasabi nilang live and breathe. That's my everyday. Filmmaking is my everyday. I've seen it evolve, devolve, and now try to rebuild itself as something else.
In an attempt to better understand the current state of the Philippine media industry in relation to film piracy, it is important to trace piracy's evolution through the years. As independent filmmaker Jim shares,
so I would download lots and lots of mp3s and people would give me, I was in high school back then, so people would give me their playlists, their songs, and sometimes I would make money out of it and sometimes I would make friends out of it. So yeah, ganun din pala ako. Nag-distribute din pala ako somehow. I profited from pirating. Pero yun, I was younger then, so yun.
It was through this anecdote that Jim realized that in his younger years, he had been intimately involved with distributing pirated materials beyond his personal consumption. The reason he didn't recognize it as such was because the differences between sharing and distribution among friend groups are minute. Similar to Jim, filmmakers Clementine and Control share somewhat related experiences.
This film writer and film critic was telling me how my film reminded him about the Spanish film that he said, and parang, oh, that's interesting, ganyan. And he gave me a link so I can go see it. These are between two, like, a film writer and a filmmaker about piracy. I've shared links, I've shared my own films, pero I'm not like, I have like a library or whatever.
Consumption lang. I've never ripped I ripped our own film pala. I had to. Sorry, I had the master copy, so I made an mp3. That's it. And I was bringing it around. I needed a backup copy. So technically, it's not piracy because I wasn't distributing it and I was the producer anyway. But I felt like a pirate because it was in the same folder as my pirated downloads. So if you look at the folder, movies, di ba? That's it. Ang nawawala. Yeah. It's in an mp3 na in-encode ko pa to be like a download. So it could be torrentable, but I've never encoded and distributed a film specifically for distribution online for free. It's just, the most siguro that I experienced was, I never, siguro with the exception of some films, I never downloaded local content made by friends. Or local content in general, local films, parang never nga ako. Ay, hindi, sorry. Pirate yung film namin. Dinownload ko. Just to check.
Control had pirated his own film.
Tama. I downloaded their own film. Kasi nag-pop up siya. It was reported to us. So I downloaded it. So I have a pirated copy of... Tama. I have a pirated copy. Not just my own MP4, but I have a pirated copy of our film. And it was legit. I know where it came from.
Filmmaker Mads also shares a comparable experience.
This first film that I made didn't have any script, didn't have any budget or film or any strings attached at all. It was a personal venture where I was able to finish that and screen that in festivals and locally. It kind of had a following. So I was thinking, then I was consuming pirated DVDs, pirated films. I don't have any distributor. I don't have any sales agents. I don't know anyone from the exhibition spaces. So then I thought of the film pirate. The person that I was buying DVDs from in Katipunan, one day I contacted him and approached him. And I said, what do you think? I have this film. Do you want to distribute it for me? I'll give you a cut. It was a serious thing, no? But of course, I was laughing to myself. I guess that was kind of the fun of having things illegitimately or not being very proper about things, even with the mode of production. So, even with a mode of distribution, pirate, mano, ano ba? Pwede ba tayong gumawa ng deal? So imagining that this pirate is just a street peddler and, he would have to turn to his curator. I just gave the pirate a copy of the film just so they could assess whether there is market potential with this quite niche experimental film, di ba? Parang, kasi bibigyan ba ako ng panahon ng Star Cinema or ng any Regal or distributors? Not at all. And so, parang, let's try a deal, no? Parang, let's do it. Let's try to shake the system. I was so disappointed that he never got back to me. And so maybe even the pirates thought, there's no market for this.
We then asked Mads why he did it in the first place.
Kasi nga, di ba, as an artist, di ba, trying to challenge forces of the market and knowing that hindi ka naman mainstream hindi ka naman kikita sa mass audiences, but you feel so strongly about encouraging other people to tell their stories. Maybe trying early on, I wanted to see kahit na half jokingly and with the spirit of fun, diba? Why not? To have all these ideas. So I was never part of any film, proper film or educated in film school. So this is our place, diba? To try to see the spaces that we can do, but otherwise other people have been taught properly to do things. So as we laugh about it, we begin to realize that, of course, with piracy, they need to curate. They need to also determine titles that people will buy. So nakakatawa, di ba? Parang, so where is our place as artists?
With this, Mads introduced us to a less frequently discussed side of film piracy, a pirated film's marketability. Not just any film is granted the opportunity to be placed in the market, thus behaving in a fashion akin to how legitimate film marketplaces function. Aspiring filmmaker Regina George speaks on their experience regarding the pirated marketplace.
Because I have looked for many obscure films I have seen in my childhood on Pirate Bay just for the sake of nostalgia. And then I saw they're not there at all, no copies whatsoever. And then I looked it up how come I don't have access to it? Then I realized how bad the movie actually is. So no one wants it. Then that made me think maybe it's just bad childhood movies. Maybe they're just cash cows. Then I started looking for more movies that are rated badly. It's hard for you to come across a copy. But even if you do have a copy, you don't really have options. It's really just a few, and you don't have cedars or leechers. People don't want it. So I think for me, although it's not a formal study or whatever, I can see the correlation of it being a not great movie in terms of its criticism and the demand. there is no demand for it, so they're not gonna give you the supply to it in terms of how you can pirate it.
As someone constantly questioning the world around him, Mads talks about the personal difficulty involved when attempting to comprehensively define film piracy.
Complex. A transaction between, for example, okay, a filmmaker and a film festival. Okay, this is pure, and don't get me wrong, this is purely legitimate and agreed upon by both parties. Diba? So, to really set the record straight, okay, what's the difference if yung mga borrowing moments, diba, yung mga friends, tapos, hey, pwede ba ganito? Or stopping to ask, saan mo talaga napanood to? Diba, parang ganun. And also, parang film and film festival. Sometimes, there's a quite an uproar minsan pag, oh, does this festival pay for your films when you lend them your films to be publicly screened and they earn from the tickets? Parang what is the, parang hiniram mo, okay, alam ng filmmaker na pinalabas mo. That's the difference, of course. But you don't ask, okay, how much should we rent? Should we give you for, should we compensate for you for the film that you're lending us that we're benefiting from? Diba? So, in language na yun, parang they don't pay for it, but they screen it with other people in a room. Same thing as what I've been doing.
Mads had shared previously that in his early days of filmmaking, he had hosted a series of film screenings in the Metro Manila area. These screenings consisted of illegally obtained foreign and local films.
But of course, the filmmakers don't know, okay, but because I know, is it so much of a different thing now that, this is not piracy. Of course, it's not piracy. I know it's not piracy, but diba, minsan yung label, sometimes they tend to put a black and white dichotomy between spaces.
Many are susceptible to oversimplifying the very concept and definition of film piracy, and this is exactly the issue that Mads raises. Most try to define piracy word for word in a literal sense and automatically assume it applies to all kinds of circumstances. The habit of oversimplifying film piracy also occurs in other aspects of the practice. For instance, it also extends to film piracy's convenience. When we asked him about the last time he engaged in film piracy, Mads said,
How was it? I don't know. It was ordinary. It was nothing. It was there. And I was happy that I got to see the film. Because otherwise, of course, we would have to wait for it and go to the cinemas. Very, very dangerous. Diba? So it usually is a non-event. It is, of course, it is a choice.
Control had a similar experience too.
The last two time I did it, well, actually, surprisingly, matagal lang hindi, but yet, 2 days ago, I downloaded one of my favorite films, Tinker Tailor. Only because I wanted to watch it. And then wala naman siya sa mga streaming services. I checked my old hard drives. Wala. I knew I had a torrent somewhere, but di ko mahanap. So I just downloaded it again. And a minute and a half, I was done, and I was watching it. Oh, how can you beat that? Di ba? Is it my fault that it's accessible?
The ease of piracy is its most compelling feature and is what makes usage frequent. Film student Ozoo shared this.
Yeah, I probably download at least one film a week. And then usually if I really want my friends to watch certain film, I upload it in a drive and then send it to them just to try and make sure they watch it. Yeah, I have a drive of films to send to people.
It also comes with certain benefits that other methods don't have, as film critic Spencer illustrates here.
I think piracy matters a lot, in digital platforms, no. So to be honest, ako kahit available na sa Netflix, dina-download ko pa rin kasi mabagal yung internet So naglalag. So imagine nanonood ka sa Netflix, naglalag siya. So parang if you download it in full, there's no lagging. So convenient din siya as far as and binayaran ko pa rin yung Netflix, so...
Regina George adds,
I like to watch by not streaming because I'm very impatient and I don't like it when I have to wait for it to load and buffer. Oh my god, ang arte. But yeah.
Speaking further on the immediacy that film piracy provides, aspiring producer VHS Mouse says,
watching movies, watching films, it's really been a pastime for so long, and it's a shared bond activity in it itself. So I guess it's just us being more creative. Like film piracy is just a way to just make it easier, make it more accessible, make it more immediate.
The convenience that comes with film piracy has helped pave the way for the practice to become a new form of distribution in the industry. Here Jim explains just how much change it brings forth.
Distribution is how you make business. It's how you create business out of the film, the finished film itself. So if someone else benefits from that, that can be considered disruptive to that relationship between the owner, the property, or the intellectual property, and the regulators. So the piracy disrupts that dynamic.
In context of distribution's business implications, VHS Mouse supports the idea of film piracy disrupting these dynamics, especially when discussing the limits of local streaming services.
It's not Netflix. We have to recognize that. It's not a Netflix. So sometimes people will just think, oh, okay, so I'll just walang option eh. So, I'll just download it. And that's what I want to avoid. It's like, it's just it goes into culture now that people are just so used to illegally downloading.
Norman adds to that and brings it even deeper into Philippine context and says,
and I guess if you want to subscribe to, I think Labdia said something about how he sort of framed piracy as like new technology that is redistributing film and art to the world. So if you want to view it in that way, like I think that's valid as well.
the relationship between money and art is a difficult one to negotiate, as aspiring filmmaker Samlex acknowledges.
Although I understand that for these studios to make more films or support more filmmakers, they need these profits. It's still quite a complex thing because at the same time, you have to take into consideration our economic status as a country. So how are these goods distributed in our country? Sino ba yung mga may access dito?
Film critic Norman also expands on the issue of access to artists and their audience.
The sort of generic, like legal definition of piracy, I feel tends to step around or sidestep the reality that film and all kinds of art are already massively inaccessible to a huge percentage of the global population, and certainly a majority of the population in the Philippines. The industry is set up in such a way that there will always be people who do not have access to film. And I don't think that that's something that we should just take as, oh, well, that's just how the world is, or, it's not something we should just shrug our shoulders at. The issue is systemic, definitely. And I think that piracy is a symptom of the issue. And it's not necessarily the issue itself. I mean, I'm also not trying to sugarcoat the fact that piracy does pose challenges to filmmakers, especially local filmmakers who are trying to earn enough money to make another film or to just, have something to eat. But again, I think that, for example, launching a campaign to end film piracy won't get rid of it forever. And filmmakers who struggle to make their next film or earn enough money will still be struggling with or without piracy. There are definitely deeper problems to be addressed. In my notes for this, I wrote in parentheses NFTs, haha, but I'm not really like there's some sort of like sentiment there about NFTs and how this is a little tangential. There's this idea that they are for the artists, but they're not really because they're making the art even harder to access. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on NFTs anyway.
Larger world issues are also embedded in the DNA of film piracy, in the process and in its actors. Factors such as one's socio-economic status and the effects of capitalism must be considered when trying to understand the practice and the ways in which some Filipinos continue to pursue it. After expressing that he disagreed with those saying that people should just accept the limitations in terms of access, Norman says,
I think that in itself is an unjust way of thinking that's obviously like a product of capitalism. So for me, I really just don't necessarily have guilt about it. I'm not very loud about it either. But yeah, I guess that's why I continue to do it.
Samlex adds by saying that,
In an ideal world, if we have that ideal world, but I know we don't, and sobrang kapitalista ng society natin na gano'ng kahigpit na, if you change one thing about it, may chaotic thing kasi na-systematize na yung capitalism. So it's a complex thing to change it. So the little space, sobrang little way na lang ng resistance ng piracy against this big system of capitalism na na-systematize na yung industrialization of films. So it's a product of capitalism. And although piracy is so easy to simplify, it is what resists against the system.
Pero 'di ba, parang ang hirap, and you'll know this when you start producing your own films in the future.
says Clementine.
And then you see like a folder in Telegram of all your films. Tapos people are just watching it. Nasayang, ba't di kayo manood sa site ko? Wala na. Parang they're enjoying it. Ito ha, that's from a producer's perspective. Yeah, and and I don't have money. I make films. From a filmmaker's perspective, it's flattering that a lot of people take the time to download your film and watch it, diba? And a lot of people watching your films is a good thing for me. But I have to understand that this is how capitalism works. And to be able to continue doing what I do, kailangan, kumita siya. Kailangan magbayad yung mga tao in a legal way. So, yun, mahirap, conflicting and mahirap siya for me.
Because of capitalism's role in the practice, it is also a class issue. The economic restraints can also be felt individually, as aspiring filmmaker Regina George describes.
I also understand, like, here in the country, like, what? A movie ticket is 280 pesos? That's already a meal for, like, a small family. And that's only for one person. And having to weigh their options, it's just not practical to pay for art. It sucks. It hurts me because I call myself an artist. Artist is not a practical expense, and I get it. It hurts, but I get it. And especially for the regular person here in the Philippines. By regular, I mean someone who's lower middle income. It is all about looking for that piece of joy you can share and you can talk about with people. Because I think in movies, when you all watch it, everyone, like, I guess a movie treats everyone equally in the way that it's just gonna show you the same thing everyone is seeing. You just have different understandings and perspective. You're looking at the same piece of art, and everyone wants to see it. It's the media of the masses, right? Movies are for everyone. They're just not shown to everyone. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah.
Framing films as information, Jim points out that film piracy acts as a gateway of sorts, but still acknowledges that there's a certain sense of romanticism with the idea.
We are living in an era where information shouldn't be leveraged anymore, and media is like just packets of information and experiences. So it has to be spread out there. It has to transfer from one mind to another. And I think the business models are constraining that aspect of information distribution. But it's so unrealistic and so romantic then to think that you can sustain structures without giving monetary or assigning monetary value into these processes.
On the issue of access, Norman describes something similar.
I know it sounds philosophical, but education itself is just an issue of access as well. Like access to knowledge, like that's what the educational system is just giving other people access to knowledge and sort of facilitating the way they take in that knowledge. So the first step to that is access. And I feel like piracy breaks down a lot of the obstacles that get in the way of people who just don't have access to films. So yeah, I do think there's an inherently educational aspect to it.
Spencer adds,
This is what I usually say to my students. I graduated with a degree in film. But I'd like to say, with all due respect to all my great professors in the university, that much of my film education really came from watching films. They really came from like experiencing films on my own. And these films really come from, come online, come from torrent. And I feel like if you want to be a film writer, if you want to be a filmmaker, if you want to be someone delving into cinema, it would be very useful if you expose yourself to a lot of films. But then again, reality check in the Philippines through legal means. Well, maybe now it's better because there's online, there's a lot of streaming sites. Fine, you can subscribe to them. But there are a lot of avant-garde movies. There are a lot of challenging movies, obscure movies that are not on these platforms. And I firmly believe that piracy is the only place where you can have access to these revolutionary films, to these significant films. So why deprive yourself of those opportunities, diba? Piracy allowed me to expand my knowledge. Like if there's a new film that comes out and I want to see it, I can see it. And I feel like ano talaga siya eh, it complements, it supports someone hungry for knowledge.
And so, what happens to those who are hungry for knowledge but reside in other parts of the world? Ford shares his thoughts.
And I totally agree. There is a huge disparity in terms of how filmmakers and how film viewers and how consumers can watch films, depending on your resources, depending on your geography, depending on whether or not you even have a stable internet connection or things like that. But at the same time, we're not talking about just big studios. We're not just talking about Marvel. We're not just talking about Warner Brothers. We're talking about independent filmmakers who've been writing their scripts for 7 years, looking for going through applying to film labs, developing their scripts, and working with a budget of 5 million pesos or 7 million pesos. Or even 1 million or 3 million as per the grants given by Cinemalaya and Tucson, if I'm not mistaken. And they're doing all of this, and they're not even sure if they're going to earn anything back. And the problem of piracy certainly exacerbates that.
Control provides us with insight on how piracy was formerly viewed in older times.
I didn't feel that we were stealing. I knew we were stealing, but I didn't feel that we were stealing. We're just consuming media. And yeah, would I have stopped myself? Siguro kung nasa first world nation ako, tapos it was looked down upon, frowned upon, di ba? I would stop. Pero paano ko mapupanood yung mga sobrang malulupit na pelikula na yan? Hindi mo mahanap eh. Even if you wanted to pay, like on iTunes, ganyan. Geo-block naman tayo at that time eh. Even if you had the bandwidth, kung geo-block ka yan, hindi ka ma-play yung ibang ano eh. So wala eh. Again, I'm not saying that they forced us to do it. Parang napaka-snowflake naman yun. But napaka-mali naman to say they forced us to do it. But I think it was part of distribution talaga. The evolution of distribution.
Geo-blocking is when sites make certain content inaccessible to those in certain territories. Here, Samlex discusses the struggle.
So you don't get access to these things kasi accessible lang siya through film fests na nagsiscreen on ground internationally. So mag-iibang bansa ka pa para mapanood mo, di ba? So parang wala kang pera. Or available sa online platforms which are actually geo-blocked. So most of these times, online platforms na associated sa festivals, like ano ba yung big festivals like let's say Toronto, Rotterdam, ayun. So may online platforms kasi sila for films na hindi mo ma-access unless you're from a certain territory.
And in a way, I don't know if you can put this on the podcast, but then it feels kind of like reparations. Kasi, it's like, yes, white people give us your films for free.
Says Eve.
But then, obviously, it would suck if we found out they were doing the same to our films, being the minorities. And I don't know if that's, I don't know if it's kind of interesting how I feel like as members of the third world, as less privileged filmmakers, I feel like we kind of deserve a pass for film piracy because now we don't get access to these things as easily as people in the global north do, as people in the west do. I always kind of daydream in my head, like, if I lived in the States or if I lived in Europe and I had money, then I wouldn't be pirating at all. Like, I would have freaking Criterion channel and like Amazon, and like I'd be like living the life and I wouldn't care. So I think it really is like a third world thing. It would be really crippling if we were to lose that, because it's our own, like literally our only way, our only means of getting those films.
Many filmmakers, especially more recently, have made pleas to the public to support their film in the cinema, and or have strong ideas about how their film should be viewed. Although they are allowed an opinion on these things as creators, Norman brings up the fact that these thoughts are not always conceived with the inclusivity of audiences in mind.
I mean, it's obviously a very privileged thing to say when a director says, or when a director begs the audience to watch something only in the cinema. Because it becomes clear they're only talking to a small part of the global audience that can afford it and has easy access to a cinema in the first place. When, let's say, like Ridley Scott or something says, you have to watch my film on a big screen, because he was getting mad at like millennials on their phones or something. You know, when he says that, he's not thinking about people in the Philippines. He's thinking about people in his home country, in England, or somewhere in the UK. He's only thinking of audiences in the West. So whenever the director says something like that, I know that I'm not being addressed.
Film piracy is received differently in different countries. Montoya notes the huge difference of perspectives between first world and third world producers, suggesting that filmmakers belonging to the third world countries have a common or mutual understanding when discussing film piracy.
If a first world filmmaker or producer knows that you're doing this, they will really, really look down or they will be very, very judgmental. That's what I noticed. But it's really mostly from first world countries like maybe Australia, the US, ganyan. But those from third world, parang I guess they're so used to it that they may have all have gone through it at one point in their lives.
I could wait forever to see if either the streaming service becomes available here or if the film gets a local release somehow. But you're really just rolling the dice at that point.
Norman says.
And I remember getting into an argument with a random Westerner about this on some comment section somewhere about how, they were trying to assert that if we don't have access to a streaming service because of something like geo-blocking, then they were trying to tell me that then we just have to accept the fact that we're never going to be able to watch that thing or it wasn't made for us, quote unquote. But to me, that's ridiculous. If you view cinema as just a business, which I'm sure for a lot of people it is, then I understand that, rationally speaking. But, call me romantic, but I don't think cinema was invented to be a business opportunity. From the very, very beginning, I think it has always been for the betterment of people, and not the 1% of people, but all people, the masses.
I wish it was easier.
VHS Mouse says.
I really do. I wish it would there was just a source where at least it could tell you we have these movies, and then you can subscribe to us for those if you want, right? But then we don't have that. We have to find out for ourselves, or we have to. It depends on the territory. It depends on this. There's so many things you have to consider that parang bahala na, fuck it. I'll just watch. I'll download it. I'll just download it illegally.
Some of our other interviewees say that it's on these large corporations for not providing access in the first place, as Norman shares here.
I would spend so much money watching movies in cinemas, including travel time, including food. So in my mind, at least, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought to myself that I sort of paid my dues already and that I, quote unquote, deserved to pirate something for once finally, because in college I really would wait to watch something in a cinema. Even if copies were already circulating online, I would tell myself that I would wait no matter how long it took if I knew that the film was going to be released in cinemas. But yeah, now I don't necessarily have the guilt because of that reason, but also because of how I know that, let's say, streaming services like HBO Max and other services, because they don't offer their services here anyway, I don't necessarily think they're losing money because it's completely inaccessible to us here, and they aren't expecting revenue from the Philippines. So I know it's probably not very sound if you ask a business major or something, but in my head I'm thinking they were never going to see money from me anyway, so why not?
Control said something similar when talking to us about the returns on a local indie film. He explained that while there's money coming in, it's not enough to make back the money spent on production.
So cynical, I'm saying cynical kasi parang, shit, hindi rin naman pala enough eh. So you won't mind if I withhold another 200 pesos from you. They're just not into us. Ang hina ng local independent.
I feel like, this is a bold statement, but piracy is a resistance.
Says Spencer.
Piracy is actually resistance to, capitalism, where art has this high value, and if you cannot meet the value of that art, if you cannot pay for it, you won't be able to experience it. Wow, I feel like I said something meaningful. But yeah, don't you think so? Diba? Parang pag sinabi ng ibang tao na, ito lang siya, this is the cost of it. And if you cannot afford that, I'm sorry, you can't have it. No? And piracy says, no! You can have it for free, diba? Dahil doon, they have this ability to provide for students what they need, what they want to see. So you wouldn't resort to piracy because it's there. So dito kasi you would resort to piracy because you can't have it, diba? And even when it's there, it's expensive to a common person. No? I mean, sa atin siguro mura na yung 300 pesos, but to some people, that's a lot. No? I mean, it's really a class issue.
Samlex also agreed with this perspective of piracy.
Piracy is allowing people, especially from these classes and from those who have lesser means to be able to watch films, have access to them. So parang for me, yun yung nangyayaring social exchange na nagiging resistance siya. Rather than just being violation of the intellectual property of those who make the films.
We're a developing country and film piracy is really a reaction.
Rango says,
Puta, hindi namin afford yung films na manood sa sinihan. It's just really a reaction for us na, ayun, kahit hindi pa nauso yung Netflix, may piracy na through the CDs and DVDs sa Green Hills.
Rango further argues that it is another way to get our voices heard.
This is us telling the Netflix, the Hulus, the Discovery Plus, the Disney Plus na we don't like your business model. Gets na namin yan pineperahan nyo lang kami. So, eto yun, this is our way of saying na, ganun, gagawin nyo yan sa amin. Mag-pirate na lang kami. Tingnan natin. Diba? Anong gagawin nyo? Yun talaga. That's the reason why I really do it, is because films here are not really accessible. Kaya I really will still continue pirating films until the day I die.
However, Ford brought up the fact that we should not overly romanticize the practice.
I'm sure there are people who also just want to make money off of these films because it is income. If you can put it on a website that, for example, has a lot of ads and you earn revenue from those ads, you still get money out of it. And there are a lot of people who are still earning money off of the work and art of other people. So I'm not gonna say that like every pirate is socially conscious and is like cognizant of what they're of the implications of what they're doing or that they even care about it. But I do think it's definitely something to consider.
Whether people think about the implications of piracy or not, it continues to stay alive.
Maybe we're not conscious of it, how we benefit from piracy, no? But I feel like, it's so omnipresent, it's everywhere.
On piracy, Spencer adds that,
as a teacher, I always tell my students to dream. And I think if you want to dream, you experience stuff. You experience life. And yung exposure mo sa sining, you expose yourself to art. I think it's a way for you to appreciate the world around you, how big it is, how deep it is, yung differences ng cultures.
Regina concludes,
I don't really encourage people to do it unless it's it's from a big name like Disney. Sorry, I'm very anti-corp. And I don't promote it, but I also don't hate people for it. Like, I just say, okay, yeah, sure, I condone it, but I don't promote it. And also, I think it's just a practice everyone does.
But like what we mentioned before, one's engagement in film piracy is dependent on their priorities and is also shaped by their socioeconomic status and role in the film industry. Hence, some parts of the industry benefit or hurt significantly more than others. Film student Ozoo confirms this.
It's just, we see it as a source of knowledge, and also I guess it's okay in our school because it's not like we're reselling these films. It's purely for our own personal gain. As a student, I don't make money off of my films, so I don't see the need as to why I should make money in the future, because to me right now I have the luxury of seeing film as a medium of expression than a means of making money. So it wouldn't affect me. Probably, yeah, the industry, but like the thing is, the film industry here is already so poor that I'm not so sure if making everything legal would lift it up. So,
as someone who writes about films, Norman agrees that the practice has not left a negative impact on his own livelihood.
Honestly, like film critics in general, and sometimes I even hesitate to go so far as to call myself that, but I think film critics, like as a group, while they are involved with the film industry, they're still located outside it. So I think that piracy still benefits them/us because we're not financially affected by it at all. And I mean, it sounds a little selfish to say that it doesn't hurt me at all. But honestly, I don't think it does.
Despite the harm it can cause to those in the industry, some would argue that film piracy continues to persist due to limited government assistance. Not only is there a lack of policing piracy, but there's a significant lack of financial support for the development of Philippine cinema by the government,
100 million yung population natin eh.
says Clementine.
Diba? I mean, I think afford mong gawing 50 pesos ang ticket price ng isang pelikula kung accessible siya sa 100 million na yon. But no, it's just like less than 1 million yung nanonood ng sine talaga. And so you need to price it at 200 kasi ang daming middlemen dahil makikinabang. Streaming has cut that. So pwede mo nang i-cut din yung price ng distribution eh. Tapos yung tax pa. Pirates never pay tax. Pero parang where's the tax going? Ito na. Parang ito na yung mahabang ano. Sana the taxes go to improving the distribution of and improving the film industry to begin with. Where's the tax going to? I don't know. Dolomite sand. So yeah, sometimes you don't feel bad too much about not watching kasi hindi mo na kaya magbayad ng amusement tax. Hindi na where the tax is going to be naman ng daan. I know this isn't this is just me. And I'm not saying that people should, this is the right way to think about the situation, but it's a different way of looking at it.
Control puts it simply by saying,
legislative help from the government to incentivize or outright fund more projects that push cinema forward.
the persistence of film piracy can also be attributed to how most pirates are artists themselves, often using film piracy as a tool for their own benefit. Some of our participants noted that artists are the ones who pirate the most. Filmmaker Eve recalls something about her own father.
My dad is a creative as well. He works in advertising. And even then, there was like a culture within their circle of piracy. And they would spread ads from the West. They would burn these ads and like intellectual property onto CDs. And this was like pre-internet.
Control also agrees that most pirates are artists too.
It's the same. Parang compared to other friends outside of the industry, hindi rin naman sila mahilig mag-download at hassle mag-download eh. Kaya hanapin mo yung tamang Pirate Bay, the right link that has the right number of seeds kasi pag konti yung seeds and bagal yung download. So hassle siya. Tapos makaka-download ko pa ng virus and shit like that. Tapos mali pa yung mada-download mo, walang subtitle. So kaming mga taga-industriya ang actually expert downloader. Yun yung irony dun eh. Media professionals, editors, graphic artists, diba, are experts in downloading and pirating. So yes, dati they relied on us. But when Netflix came, it was easier for them to just let go. Hindi naman sila addicted to downloads dati. Hindi naman sila addicted to DVDs dati. Kami lang yung bibili ng DVD. Kami yung taga-bili. Uwi mo sa bahay, manonood kayo. We have the remote eh. But now that they have Netflix and any one of them can watch it on their phones, mas madali sa kanila.
Sa family ko, immediate family ko, sa dad ko, I don't think he, and my brothers are not so much into torrenting.
Mad says,
it's mostly the artists that I know that need access to it, that are engaged into kind of my rhythm of having access to legitimate and illegitimate sources of media. I don't know with students. I think with students, I don't even know if, I don't know. Parang at home naman. Parang at home naman yung mga students. Parang nagugulat ako eh. Lalo na pag may exercises ako, parang, okay. Parang almost assume na parang, okay, napanood nila to. Okay, may copy sila nito. Parang gano'n. Without, of course, getting into the details. No? But I think more so that they're more at home with this kind of, kasi parang may pagka Old Testament morality feeling ko yung parang, piracy is stealing and it's bad and it's black and white, parang, I don't know if my students really are so much affected by this and think in those terms, really.
Most of piracy's participants are people that love the work that they are pirating, and these individuals often end up pursuing a related line of work. Because of this, it ends up both hurting them and helping them, as Eve realizes during our talk.
This realization that film piracy both benefited me and could also be something detrimental to my own career it definitely became more profound with the making of my first film. Prior to that, I was all for it. I was hunting down film screeners. I was bookmarking torrents. I still do. And I got my first inkling of it being a bad thing when I was able to intern for a filmmaker a few years ago, a local Filipino filmmaker who had made a few films that had gone to international film festivals. And that filmmaker confided in me one day that they were really, really upset about their film ending up on streaming sites online, that their film had been torrented. And I was like, why? Aren't you happy that more people have access to your film? And then she did explain. And as I would soon realize working in the Filipino film industry, filmmaking is it's really fulfilling, but it's also a really soul sucking act, I would say. A lot of money and a lot of personal investment goes into it, not just monetary, but then your time and your effort, and that all reflect on the film itself. And when that film becomes a shareable file that just gets passed around, it really hurts as a creator. And I really didn't understand that until I made my own film. I have had to share my own screener to friends and family. And then I find myself kind of apprehensive about who I send it to. I think as content creators or as filmmakers, you become really protective of your work, as you should be. And that's when I really started to realize how awful it would be if the screener I was giving ended up in the wrong hands or ended up in the hands of someone I didn't know. That was a really, really scary thought to me. So only now am I really becoming conscious of the effects film piracy could have on myself personally as a lifelong pirater of films.
Established filmmaker Jim reflects on the struggle between earning a livelihood and his goals as an artist.
Kasi I want to share, ang hirap kasi I need to earn money then from what I create. But I know that the value is to like spread it out there and make it as mimetic as possible.
But perhaps it's not as difficult as it used to be. Aspiring filmmaker Regina George muses on what is possible nowadays in terms of artist compensation.
If I am as successful as I would like to be, I would be a little upset. Like, why don't you guys pay me? But at that point, I think if it's being distributed like that, I'd be okay with it. And maybe how I would counter it is I would make, and it's also like a comment of, I've said this so many times, sorry. It's also a comment on accessibility. People want to see it. So what I can do is give them an option to support me. Maybe I'd make a Patreon, or maybe I can do like a pay what you can type of thing. Because there is a demand for it, and you can even see like there's a literal demand on like Cedars and Bleachers. You can see how many people want it. Give it to them. Give the people what they want.
Oh my God! And this is probably not gonna be 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I wish to be able to have a conversation with yung guard sa apartment namin about, I don't know, Julia Ducorno.
Says Clementine.
I want to have a conversation with the cashier at the grocery about this book or this song or this film. A factory worker could after work, go to a movie house and enjoy a film. Just to enjoy a film or to actually have time to watch it. Basically, that's the ideal na hindi na siya, na it's for everyone. It's not gonna happen though, I think, in the next. But maybe, sana umabot sa ganun na films and books and art and media accessible sa lahat. Oo. Accessible sa lahat. And by access na it's just there, they can afford to actually enjoy these things. So, yun yung ideal sana. There's no need to pirate anything in that kind of scenario, di ba?
It's not a matter of exposure.
Montoya says,
it's really getting people to consciously say that I will support this.
You've been listening to Downloading Interrupted. This episode marks the third and last installment of our audio documentary on film piracy and the meanings that aspiring and established film-related media professionals have attached to the practice. This series was narrated by me, Noah Imson, and edited by Adrianna Bautista and Therese Macasaet. It was produced, researched, and written by Therese Macasaet, Adrianna Bautista, and me, Noah Imson. Special thanks to Dr. Ladrido and the people who contributed to the making of this audio documentary.